missing a very important piece of streaming equipment. I didn't have my microphone hooked up. Clearly, I was not actually ready for stream yet. This is a brand new one from Neighborhood Kids, just came out a few days ago. I know that we've got some fans of the Neighborhood Kids here, so let me just pop this over here and pop that over there. If anybody wants links to the other songs, let me know. Welcome in, everybody. Let me get this all moved over so I can properly say hello to everyone. Great to see you, Jane. As always, thank you for all the helpful reminders. It's fantastic to have you here and to have you helping me out. One guy in, great to see you. It's been a while. I hope you're doing really well. I was just thinking about you the other day that I hope that you stop by stream sometime so that we can catch up. I hope that you're doing well. Also, I hope that you're doing well as well, Matt. Good to see you. It's good that, yeah, you told me that you were going to get to see that you had told me about that, I thought. You had footage of their last show too, I want to say, which I got to see that video, which was pretty fantastic. Hideko, welcome in, Kai Matara. It's great to see you. Good. With Tom Morello. Cool. I'm glad that Tom Morello's still doing stuff. And Apolitical Daddy's back. Great to see you too. Hope you're doing well. I hope you're all having a fantastic day today. Good. We've got a lot of people here already, which is fantastic. I am so sorry, everybody. I am so sorry about Wednesday. I really, really just forgot what day it was. I just, most days I get up and I just start doing schoolwork, and Monday and Tuesday it's very clear what I have to get done because it's all very time sensitive. Everything else doesn't really matter. So once Monday and Tuesday is out of the way, my brain has a tendency to kind of just forget about days of the week because I work every day, right? I do schoolwork 7 days a week. Almost every week of the semester. So I just got up and started doing schoolwork and then didn't stop doing the schoolwork. I think it was like 3:30 before I'd even thought about it. Hold on, everybody. I've got something that I've got to go deal with. I'll be back shortly. Sorry about that, everyone, but that's done and now out of the way. That's one last thing I've got to worry about. Still stuck on this massive project for my client, and I'm spending a fair bit of free time on the planning of next year's Two-Spirit powwow in San Francisco. I would imagine that would take a lot of your time, and I don't blame you for wanting to put your own time and energy into that. That sounds really, really interesting and like a lot of fun. Good. That's really awesome. Oh, where's my closed captions? Forgot something. I did not go over my checklist before stream. I didn't go over my checklist before stream because I actually I actually had time before stream today to think about stream stuff. Anyways, so I was talking about how I just lost track of days, and that's why I didn't stream on Wednesday. So again, apologies everyone. But the plus side of that is that I got a lot of my schoolwork done on Wednesday, and then Thursday morning when I woke up and realized that it was not Wednesday, I reassessed my school schedule, and I'm really kind of like caught up, like really caught up. I have one final essay that has been submitted. I think I need a little bit more color there. I've got one final essay that's been submitted that I'm waiting to grade. I thought about grading it this morning, but it's not going to be a quick and easy one. A lot of times, especially with early submissions, it's an early submission, so a lot of times with early submissions, they are really good, so I can just sit down, read them, get them out of the way, give the grade back to the student. Everybody wins. Everybody's happy. But this is a student who turned in a rough draft, but they submitted a text-only rough draft, so they copied and pasted hundreds of words into the submission block for the assignment, and I can't do anything with that. I don't have a way to make notes on that, or to point out errors, or to highlight specific words. So I did the best I can with those text-only submissions. I have to say a bunch of words, so it takes a lot more time to grade those in the first place, because I can't just make a note where it is. I have to say, in this paragraph, this many words down, you've got or in this sentence, you've got this error, and I have to be very detailed about the notes. And I encourage the student to submit another rough draft with the formatting, so that I could give them feedback on the formatting, so that there wouldn't be a lot of notes that I had to make on their final submission. But they didn't take that advice, and they've instead submitted their essay early, having gotten no notes or feedback on how to properly format their paper. So I'm going to have to make lots of notes on their final submission. I might, in fact, kind of what I'm mulling over is if I should just email the student and be like, submit that as your rough draft. Quick, submit that as your rough draft, because it's not going to get a good grade. And it won't be that bad, really. Formatting is, well, so the way that I've got my assignment broken down is that there are 5 competencies in which they can get 3 or 4 points in most of those competencies. And it's designed so that they, there has to be another one. It's designed so that they can miss one whole competency. They can get a 0 on one of the competencies and still get not just a good grade, but a near A. I think that you can get a 95 with a 0 on one of, if you don't submit any kind of formatting, that's a 0 for that competency. So and there's the extra. So the way that I design all of my assignments is that there is always an opportunity to earn extra points. On the discussion board, we've talked about this before. They can do the bare minimum on the discussion board and get 10 points, which is what their discussion boards are worth. But if they demonstrate superior comprehension in their initial post, I'll give them 1 extra point. And if they demonstrate superior engagement, and there's lots of different ways that you can go about earning those points, then you get an extra point. So up to 120% that they can get on every week's assignment. Their essay has a total of, it has to be 25 points, right? That the maximum out of 20, right? So there's the grade is 20 for the assignment, and they can earn up to 25 points by demonstrating superior logic, or by demonstrating superior topic knowledge, by using lots of different sources that all have different viewpoints, so that you can get a variety of perspectives, right? There's lots of ways that you can earn extra points for that assignment. But generally, when students earn a few extra points in their logic, or in their topic knowledge, or in their moral theory, whatever of the other competencies, when they get the extra points, it's usually just making up for the deficiencies somewhere else in their essay, usually with regard to formatting. But it's not a big part of the assignment. You can do no formatting and still get a good grade on the assignment. But most students don't demonstrate the superior stuff. Most of my students get 2s all the way down, right? So, and then they'll get 1 or 2 3s to give them like a 75 or an 80. Is usually where most of my students fall on that one. Can students argue on their grade? No, I don't have that option officially explicitly stated anywhere, but it is something that's kind of I believe is kind of assumed. I've had several occasions where, well, I wouldn't say several, really. Out of the many years that I've been teaching, I've only had a handful of students come to me after and challenge my grades. And I would say in about half of those cases, I do award extra points, or rather, in half of those cases, I regrade the assignment. Sometimes I award more points, or sometimes I award less points for regrading. And in half of those cases, I don't redo anything. I just tell the student, this is why I gave you what you got, and it's because you have demonstrated, or you have failed to demonstrate X, Y, Z, right? I offer an explanation back. So that's generally not, especially when it comes to the essay. I've never had anybody go, you gave me a bad grade because you disagree with my viewpoint or whatever. I've never really had any kind of respect for your expertise as to why I don't offer something like that. Oh yeah, no. It's funny that you mentioned that, Matt. That you can copy and paste it yourself back into Word. Sometimes I do that just so I can read it. I don't have to do that anymore. It's been a long time since I had to. But when I first became an instructor, I had some control issues. I had some issues. And when students would submit something that was not formatted properly, and if it was bad enough, what I would do is I would copy and paste, no matter how they submitted it. I would copy and paste it into a new document and format everything correctly so that I could read it. Because I could not, when I first became an instructor, I could not read an essay that was not formatted correctly. I just, some kind of mental hang-up. But I've gotten over that now. I can just get through that. And in fact, usually if the formatting's really terrible, I just ignore it. And I go, okay, I'm only gonna read the arguments. I'm only gonna get an idea of the substance of what they're dealing with. And then after I get a general impression of the student's comprehension, then I'll go back and worry about the formatting. But usually that's the very first thing I do. Because I can do it automatically. When I open up the document, I can see error, and I have things I've got a Word document with common offenses, right? The most common and the somewhat common offenses that I have, and in the order that I go through the essay. So I go through, and their spacing is usually one of the first things, or the header if they haven't included the header. So I just copy and paste. And, there's a little thing where I can pin directly on where the header is supposed to be. I can go right to where the topic heading is supposed to be, and copy and paste. This is where the formatting notes for this. It's supposed to include this information in this order, and this is how that's supposed to be formatted. All of that's already typed up. So when it comes to formatting, mostly it's just I'm copying and pasting the things that are incorrect. And then there's extra periods, type the word omit, right? It's really quick and easy that I can go through and just find everything. And then when I get to the works cited page, then, my brain does like a cash register is like clink, clink. And I go through and I'm thinking about, okay, all of the errors that I caught all the way down, which of those errors corresponds directly to the works cited? Where do I have to go and find the source and the source listing? Where do I have to do that? And then I do that complicated stuff first. And then that's usually actually the hardest bit. And then verifying student sources. And then I check the works cited page, which is also, it's usually the same 5 or 6 errors that students have made. So I just copy and paste. And the formatting, going over the formatting takes me like 5 to 10 minutes a lot of times, unless it's really bad, or unless the offenses are especially complicated. Exposure therapy for the win. Yeah, it was absolutely a matter of exposure therapy. Why not more people argue about the grades? I think that people, when people get called out apolitical daddy for intellectual laziness, usually their first response is, oh, yeah, you're right. I should have, or boy, I feel silly that I didn't notice that, or that I overlooked that kind of thing, because they've had weeks and weeks and weeks of working with me and talking with me about various ethical issues. So I don't think that most students take issue with me or my positions or how I feel about things, because I don't care. I have a very blasé attitude that I express towards my students about what it is that they care about, and I make sure that they understand that when I'm critical of viewpoints, I'm critical of them because of some kind of mechanical flaw or some kind of meta-ethical mistake or some fallacy, right? I'm not just saying, well, this is a terrible argument, and with no elucidation. I go into the nitty-gritty details with them over lots of things, so that I think that they have a general trust of me that actually takes weeks for me to try to erode, which I do deliberately try to get them to not trust me. There are several instances throughout the course where I will be speaking out of both sides of my mouth, and it's because the theories are speaking out of both sides of my mouth. And I present those ideas genuinely, despite the fact that they are inconsistent, and with the hopes that some student is going to astutely point out that that I'm making mistakes in reason, and often they don't. But then at the, towards the end of the lecture, I'm like, this is the thing that I was saying earlier that was actually really silly, and somebody should have called me out for this, right? And then I find other ways to try to undermine my own credibility too. For what's the other? Oh, with rights discourse. When we're talking about rights discourse, I am transparent about the fact that there's a whole section in the textbook that deals with rights discourse, and that I don't assign that on purpose because I think that the author of the textbook doesn't understand rights discourse. And what I tell my students is, instead of taking my word for it, you should probably read what Nina Rosenstand has to say about it. I probably shouldn't have said the author's name right out like that, but you should probably read their viewpoint and get an idea of what they mean and why they mean what they mean, and contrast that with my viewpoint and decide for yourself whether you think that they know what they're talking about, or whether you think that the things that I've taught you with regard to what Immanuel Kant had to say about rights is more accurate than the garbage that is in the textbook, because it's hot. It is flat out, absolutely, unabashedly, embarrassingly poor philosophy. It's really bad. It's much of the textbook, right? The section on rights discourse especially is bad, but lots of the textbook is just flat out wrong. Its whole spiel on deontology is, it's clear to me that Nina Rosenstand doesn't understand what Immanuel Kant meant with the categorical imperative, and with how to, and this is somebody who has been teaching. When they wrote the last edition of the textbook, they had been teaching for more than 20 years and are probably still teaching right now to this day. And it's really, it's an embarrassment for philosophy for those people to be walking around. And this is shots fired. I've said the author's name too, and I don't care. Let her come after me. Let her challenge me, right? Right, because I've read Immanuel Kant. I've read those sources firsthand. I've read a lot of stuff on rights discourse, besides Ayn Rand and John Hospers, which seems to be the primary source for her understanding of rights discourse. I would say, yes, I am more of an authority than they are, just by demonstration of topic knowledge. But they are a more credible authority than I am, in that they have been doing the thing a lot longer than I have. They've been teaching for at least 2 decades longer than I have, I would imagine. I think I annoyed both reformists and revolutionaries with my most recent article. Nice. It's pointing out how reformists will inevitably fail, but also that the revolutionary left have already failed and must appropriate the organizational and mobilizing forces of reformist movements. Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Oh, that's right. I don't have the link to your most recent one yet. I have an email notifying me that it came out, and I meant to read that this morning, and I just didn't have time yet. One guy, when you say, imagining me opening a badly formatted document and the brain making that donk error sound, yes. That is very, very accurate to how experience was for me, anyways. Because my brain would just be like, nope, I'm not gonna, nope, I'm not even gonna look at that. And I'm like, but brain, I need you to do this. Brain says, nope. Thank you for the link, Kaimatara. Let me go and open that now, so I can have the link saved for. Yeah. Revolution is dead. Long live revolution. Thank you for sharing the link. We'll take a look at that later. What was the thing? Oh, the thing that I wanted to other respond to. Maybe it's a subject where the student can sometimes exceed the teacher. A political daddy is something that I encourage actually, and is true. So, case in point, I have a student this semester who has submitted their I believe that I have looked at their rough draft 5 times now. Um, I don't have a limit on the number of times they can submit the rough draft, and I do that on purpose because I do want to encourage a back and forth. But sometimes it can be a little bit tedious, when it's so much back and forth. Anyway, but I don't mind, and I especially don't mind for this student. I've mentioned before that I have favorites. Every semester I have favorite students, and this is one of my favorite students. They are brilliant and critical, and they've got a lot to say about a lot of things, which are all things that I really like. And the essay that they have submitted is it's not well. It's not above my head so far as philosophical understanding. But it's way above what I teach. So what I teach is here on this level, right? So ethics basically is down here, and my course is a slightly more rigorous. It's a higher level course than your basic ethics course. So, but this is what I teach up here, and what the student submitted was up here. It's way beyond anything that I teach. It's far more critical, and the sources are the sources themselves are more critical, and the student has been critical of the sources in a way that is just masterful. And I don't take credit for that. I wouldn't, right? That student submitted because my essay is very generic. I'm not at all leading them or guiding them. I give them a bunch of general stuff, and for students who don't want to think outside of the box, I give them a bunch of boxes to think in. But I don't really do much beside that, right? So far as direction, they have to pick a moral position on some ethical issue. Whatever that moral position is, whatever the ethical issue is entirely up to them. And how they defend it is also entirely up to them. I require that they use logic, and that they use at least one major moral theory somewhere in their essay, either as an argument itself or as a framework for assessing the arguments. Or there's a bunch of different ways that you can use moral theories, but I just give them the stuff, and then they arrange the parts how they want to arrange the parts, and then fill in the algebra. And with this student, it's one of the best essays that I have gotten this decade. It's really a fantastic essay. And again, that's not something that I would take credit for. That the student is sharp, and they did a good job. I just happened to be the instructor that they got. Did you see the Epstein files dirt of the day? Not really. I haven't looked at any that stuff today. Oh no. No, Matt. I never have anyone defend Israel. Um, I've had a few students, and only at one college. So at one of my universities, I never had anyone even come close to defending Israel, and I suspect that nobody would, right? And there's some reasons that I make that assumption, but at my other university, I have some students who I suspect might, but don't. Connie apparently blew Bill Clinton. Oh wow. Thought I shock in eyes after reading Israel. I didn't get that. Like the exact task in the future, but my understanding of ethics is not that good. I just see it as an opinion. You see ethics as an opinion? Because it's not. And that's a very easy thing to explain in the way that it's irrefutably not just a feeling that you have. Or an opinion, right? Because that's kind of what the I know I'm wrong. That's good. That makes it for a good philosopher. Rule number 1: you're always wrong. Put so much evidence in unsecured email. I mean, I believe. I'm glad that the emails are starting to come out, and I'm glad that there's starting to get to be some traction on the Epstein stuff. Not only is it not going away, but it is something that is gaining traction, and it really does have the potential to help slide us back in the right direction. Well, further from the wrong direction, I guess. Yeah, but ethics cannot be opinion because it corresponds to states of affairs in the real world, right? You can have an opinion about whether pineapple goes on pizza because that doesn't actually correspond to real states in the real world, except that you can emote that expression when you don't want people to get a pizza with pineapple on it for you, right? But how you feel about it doesn't actually matter. When it comes to things like whether you should lie or whether you should harm others, there are material consequences in the real world about those beliefs that you have. Therefore, those are not just opinions. There are moral facts which are associated with those states of affairs, which result because of your actions. Whether or not you choose to recognize the moral salience of those moral facts, that's a different question. But there are moral facts associated with the states of affairs in the world which result as it connected to your actions. So you unavoidably make moral decisions, and those moral decisions aren't just your opinions. They are things that you do in the world to change the world such that states of affairs in the world are now different. They are now better or worse for people in some kind of morally quantifiable way. Right direction, Democrats? Yeah, no. No, the Democrats are not the right direction. Yes, I did see that the government is opened. Jane, I've got some mixed feelings about that. I mean, I agree with everybody's disappointment with the Democratic Party. I just cannot convey that enough. But I don't know. I've got some mixed feelings about government shutdowns in the first place. Yes, the government is already all the way open. I thought. Votes this Monday, then Donnie signs. Oh, so it might be something that's still ... somewhat pending. I thought that it was already a done thing, but I have not been doing a good job of keeping up on the news the last few days. Tim Kaine also confirmed they used the rotating victim tactic on this. Oh, right. Rotating villain, yeah. There are material consequences in the real world about the crime of pineapple on pizza. It creates contaminated items that no longer edible. You make ethics sounds like a science. Well, it's because it is. It's not that it's like a science. Apolitical daddy. It is. So, and this is I know philosophers have been complaining about this since the dawn of philosophy, but all science is philosophy. All science is philosophy. Philosophy first, philosophy up here, and then all of the sciences are birthed out of them. And this is, I'm not mad at you, apolitical daddy, but what I do is science. And what I do is far more critical in a lot of ways than science. And requires a lot more thorough rigor than science. Because I can't just look at, or I can't just demonstrate through chemical reactions. Right, I don't have equations that I can put down to show you the concreteness of the science, but the science is real. It is the case that you live in a world, and in that world there are others, and you have relationships among and between you. This is necessarily the case about existence. Right? And there are things that we can extrapolate out about that. I would take the route of pluralism, and argue that we have a moral duty to respect the freedoms and autonomy of others. There's one demonstrable characteristic about the nature of existence that we can look to. And that characteristic is that you have an experience of the world that you cannot share with anybody else. And there's only one thing that you do share with all of the other beings which are in existence. And that is that they too have a perspective that they cannot share with anyone. That's the one thing that you have in common, is that you have an experience of the world that's unique to you and can be shared with no one. But everybody else also has a unique perspective of the world that can be shared with no one. This is the thing that unifies us and is one of, I think, the most convincing moral reasons why we should care about others. Is that they have a perspective of the world which is unique and cannot be shared with others, like you do. So you should value that they do, and that there is a sharedness that you have with somebody in existence. Because what you share almost no characteristics with anybody, actually, metaphysically. When it comes to who you are and what you are and your essential characteristics, there's by far more different about you than similar between you and anybody else, right? That the differences are greater by far, and this one similarity ties us all together. No, you weren't talking down on philosophy. It's that's a trigger thing for me. It's really just fun and funny. I don't really take it that seriously. But it is a thing that philosophers have been talking about since the dawn of philosophy. that as soon as somebody thinks that they can do the philosophy a little bit more rigorously, then it turns into an ology, psychology, or mathematics, or right, all of the other things that you think of as sciences were once philosophy, and were offshoots that became its own formalized school of thought. Maybe I meant the word morality is an opinion, but see, it's still not. You're getting closer. Good. That's a good pushback, Apolitical Daddy, that the word morality is more like an opinion, but it's still not. And I'll have to go a little bit harder on moral facts to assert that, but we're going to put a pin in that real fast, and come back to it in a minute. I take the stance that morality is real and that morality is an emergent phenomenon of empathetic beings. Right. Yes. It is, I would argue that morality isn't something which exists by itself anywhere in the world or anywhere in existence. But what Jane has said is really, really pretty close to what I would argue, is that there are, right, when I talk about moral facts, right, so let me give an example of something that I consider is an incontrovertible moral fact. Beings which have the capacity for autonomy ought to have that autonomy respected, and other beings ought not to interfere with the autonomy of those autonomous beings, because they are beings which have autonomy. This is a natural argument in that we are looking to states of affairs in nature to base our social constructed ideas off of. But it departs away from pure naturalism, I would argue. And this is following the lines of, because I'm departing from Hobbes and going along the lines of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, to say that it might be the case that there are certain kinds of natural bonds that we have with each other, like parents and their children, right? This is a natural bond where we can see that there's a relationship here and that there's some kind of duty or responsibility. If you, the parent, brought that thing into the world, you have a responsibility to that thing. You've made that choice for it. Now you've got to do something about that, right? And there's a natural relationship with that. But Jean-Jacques Rousseau is going to say, but the moment that people decide to continue to work together in mutual cooperation, when there's no natural necessary bond there, then what we're talking about are social bonds that we think are valuable and important for us as being social beings in a social contract where we get to live in a society and trust that that society will do well by us and not abuse us, right? This is part of the social contract. And as part of the social contract, you are conditioned to accept certain moral truths, that you cannot interfere with the autonomy of autonomous beings by making them slaves or by imprisoning them, right? These are things that you cannot do. They violate those people's as right, and if you do that, then you will be held accountable. And these become moral facts by social convention. It might not be the case that the universe itself is very much concerned about whether you commit murder, but it is still a moral fact that you shouldn't, because you live in a culture and society of other people, and those people all believe this general principle that you shouldn't just kill people for no good reason, right? I already read that one. Good. In NZ or Domino's Pizza had spaghetti pineapple on ham. Had spaghetti. Yuck. I don't mind pineapple and ham on pizza, but spaghetti? Yuck. Why would you do such a thing? You've got dough. You don't need the pasta. If you have dough, I mean, it sounds a very American thing to do, to double up your carbs. You might as well deep fry it. Oh, ugh, it looks gross. Ugh. Hold on. I have to punish you all with this. That is an unattractive looking pizza. Ugh. Oh, still got the starting soon here. That's funny. Yeah, that is a disgusting looking pizza. Right. Aren't they? Italians all across the world right now are going, oi. Good. So, what I would like to do today is, oh yeah, I wanted to look at this idea of leftist perfectionism. That's really weird. Okay. But I want to get through the other Anarch video first before I talk about this thing that I want to talk about. Yes. Yes, we are, Jane. We're about to watch video. That's what I want to do, is get started with the video. In because I think that's going to work well for segueing into this other thing that I want to talk about. I think. I'm hoping. I haven't seen the video yet, so I'm not sure. I'm just making assumptions. Just making a bunch of sweeping assumptions, just hoping for the best, really. It's up, pulled up over here. Why can't I find the thing I'm looking for? That's because okay. Good. Good. Yeah, because I really like these videos. I really like these videos for a few reasons, because as has been pointed out by a few times by a few people in chat, the way that I talk about anarchism generally tends to sound a lot more like communism, because I really like Marx. I use a lot of Marx's language, and my journey left was paved by lots of Marxists. This is something that I've been thinking an awful lot. Kai Matara was talking about having a self-reflective piece that they were working on. Zoe Baker recently had not recently, but has had a self-reflective piece. And it's really Anarch. That's what I was thinking about. Anarch has had this which is kind of self-reflective, and it's got me to be self-reflective. And it's good for me to get back to, or get used to using anarchist language again. That's what I was more fluent with, I guess I would say, in my undergraduate, right? When I was in my undergraduate getting my philosophy degree, I already considered myself an anarchist and was reading lots of anarchist literature. But to be honest, my understanding of philosophy was just not good enough, really, for me to get a lot of the depth that was in a lot of the works that I was reading. And it wasn't until I started reading Hannah Arendt, is a really, really good example. Hannah Arendt and Iris Marion Young, who are both, and this is something that I haven't talked about in a while, so I'll bring this up. They're both Marxists that are clearly using Marxism in their philosophies, but they do it very, very subtly. And the reason why they do it so subtly is because they lived in a time when if you were writing about Marxism, you just didn't get published. Period. And so with Hannah Arendt is a really good example. She became such a powerful and unquestionable authority on a lot of the things that she was writing about because she was brilliant. And part of her success is that Marxism stays in the background foundation of a lot of her thinking, but isn't often explicitly brought up over and over and over again. So if you, I'm trying to think of a good example of where the book was published, totalitarianism, the one on totalitarianism. The book is published, and there are later prefaces that have a lot more commentary about Marx and Marxism after it had not been so passé. Right, the original preface that came out with it didn't really talk about it at all, but later prefaces did talk about it. Right, that she was more explicit about it when she was famous enough and had enough of her own credibility that she couldn't be naysayed anymore. So that's it's really, really helpful and refreshing for me to go back to my anarchist roots where I started my leftist journey, right? It was mostly Marxist philosophy who got me to figure out really what was going on. But anarchism opened the door for me and is the thing that I went back to after I had read all the Marxism. I found Marxism really lacking, and the lack led me to back to anarchism with a much more thorough, deeper understanding of what all that stuff meant back in the day. But anyways, let's I'm just rambling. Let me stop rambling and just put the video on.
Hey everyone, Anarch here, and this is another episode of Anarch Abridged. In this series of videos, what I've been doing is going back over some of my video essays and summarizing them in a little bit easier to understand terminology, trying to bring them down to the level of, say, a lecture. That makes this the third in the lecture series. I recommend you go watch the first two if this is the first one you've seen, but this will also have some standalone value. The topic I'm going to be covering today is what is anarchy in my conception? And apparently Morticia is going to be joining us. Isn't that right, Morticia? Never mind. She's lost interest. Great. Now the other cat's here. I'm trying to record, y'all. Come on. They just decided that I started recording, so now they needed to be here as well. Anyway, in the previous part of this video series, I was talking about how anarchism is related to complex systems analysis and how anarchism actually advocates all of the fundamental principles that are needed for a system to exhibit what is called emergence. If you want to know why it's important that a system demonstrate emergence, you can go back to part 2 of the lecture series. Here, I'm just going to take that part for granted.
Wish I had cook in my mouth. But, so, one of the things that I think is really interesting is at the beginning of the last video, before it started to play, I made some assumptions. I said something along the lines of, I believe that by emergence, what we're going to be talking about is fluid emergent leadership and something else, or a few other things. I don't remember what I was talking about, none of which ended up being the case. With this theory of emergence, I wasn't expecting such a deep dive into the theory of emergence itself. Because Anarch isn't talking about the emergence of any kind of thing in particular. Anarch is talking about emergence. That is, when something becomes, or when something crosses a threshold and now is. What is required for something new to exist, right? We're talking about a different kind of, well, a more general kind of process. It's emergence is very similar to dialectics, and in fact, I think I can just leave that there. Well, no, I really can't. It's because it's not at all the same. It's not at all the same. Synthesis is mostly about your relationship to the world. We are concerned with other kinds of relationships and how those relationships impact you, but it's mostly about what the world is versus your state of affairs, and there being some kind of intermingling of those two. Well, we might have, I don't know, I might have to back up and get a little bit more metaphysical here. Because emergence is it's well, very closely tied to power, right? Emergence is typically how power is manifested in the world, but the power manifested needs to be unpacked a lot more. I bring the steaming bread to my nose, and it tells me stories of wheat fields under the sun. I taste it, and it hums the warmth of yesterday's work. I touch it, and it holds the memory of flour and sweat. In this moment, I am listening, not with ears, but with all the ways the world speaks to me. Oh, that's quite beautiful. I gotcha. I didn't see my next article is going to be on how revolutionaries can be amongst the people again. That is the message far better, because our language is quite alienating, because English doesn't describe it very well. So we revolutionaries need to start speaking in metaphors and stories. Here is a sample. All right, so right. I bring the steaming bread to my nose, and it tells me stories of wheat fields under the sun. I taste it, and it hums the warmth of yesterday's work. I touch it, and it holds the memory of flour and sweat. In this moment, I am listening, not with ears, but with all the ways the world speaks to me. Thank you, Jane. That's going to be very helpful for me in just a minute. So thank you for putting that. That's exactly right. This is my best attempt at describing Rongo in English. Oh, okay. Well, most people who know a little Maori know the word Whakarongo, which means listen. Many don't know what Rongo means because Rongo does not have a sufficient English equivalent. Rongo is rooted in a broader sensory experience far beyond anything that a single English word can hold. Okay? This is an issue we see with revolutionary language too, which is why we must not be afraid of telling stories or speaking in metaphors to bridge across raging hostile river of English. Yes, I think that's really very on point, Kai Matara. It's something that we've talked about a few times here on the stream, is that the language that we use, especially the English language, is a good example of not really helping us articulate the ideas that we're trying to get across. Yo, I'm getting a socialism and liberation candidate on the next Senate race. Fantastic. That's awesome, Matt. That's going to be awesome. Good news, right? Good news. That's really exciting. Thank you for sharing the good news. But yes, emergence is when a system behaves more than the sum of its parts. Right. So yeah, synthesis is, in Hegelian terms, synthesis, dialectics is more about you reconciling with the states of affairs. Now, I'm being a little bit specific here because dialectism is a little bit more than that. There's a lot that can be, there's a lot more to be unpacked. But I can specify and say Hegelian when Hegel first starts to come up with dialectics in the first place. It's about understanding how the understanding comes to understand. Right? There are states of affairs in the world that contend with the mind, and the mind contends with the states of affairs, and those two things go through a process together by which a new thing has now emerged, right? And I'm using that term on purpose here, because this is where we get truth, and truth emerges out of the synthesis that we do in dialectism. And that is not the same thing as the emergence that we're talking about here. Jane does a really great job of describing this. It's when we experience something in a system that demonstrates a ordered pattern of coherence, despite our trying to force that on it. Right? That there is something, and that something is doing its own thing and has become its own power, not because other forces have caused it to come to be, but because they're the states of affairs. I've lost it. That's it's something that doesn't require synthesis with the individual. Is this distinction even important? I don't know that this. I'm spending an awful lot of time trying to say the thing that I'm trying to say, and now that I'm thinking about it, it's not really that important anyway. Let me just get back to the video and let them get to it.
However, what I will be doing is returning to the 5 values that we set out in the last part of this video series. And those values are freedom, solidarity, equality, the unique, and ownness. The reason these values will be important again in this part is because what I plan to do is take each of these values and look at the interplay of each of them. That is to say, look at how freedom and equality interact. Look at how the unique and solidarity interact and things like that. The reason why I think this is a valuable thought experiment is because what I found when I did this analysis was that almost all of the principles that anarchists have laid out as being necessary in order to achieve an anarchistic society of some kind arose out of all of these interplays. Another reason why I think this approach is preferable to me is because I can't really lay out to you what anarchy, which is an emergent phenomena of an anarchic system, might actually look like. It's impossible to tell you what its exact features are going to be, how they're going to structure their society, how it's going to overcome particular difficulties. However, if we have
Also, it would be difficult to come up with any kind of criteria or thresholds which would be meaningful. And this kind of reminds me of the discussion that we were talking about with regard to fascism. It's beneficial for us to be able to point to a list of things or to point to a particular kind of description and then compare that to people or compare that to actions or activities so that we can see if there's a clear match. It would be nice if fascism were something that was just so easily definable, right? If it was something that was just easy, something that we could put into categories or establish thresholds for. But it turns out it's actually much more complicated, right? Fascism includes 12 different characteristics that fascism has displayed in many different iterations over the history that we've been studying fascism. But that's not to say that all fascist movements will tick all of those boxes, nor should we require that they do. We shouldn't expect them to or have any kind of idea associated with ticking off boxes that say, oh, yep, now that's no. We should not be thinking about fascism like that at all. We should be aware that there are many different ways that this same kind of thing can emerge. Many different ways that it can look or be. And similarly, anarchy or anarchism or just systems or emergent systems are that same kind of way. It's not going to be something that we can or should try to define in any clearly delineated, easy to identify way, because then we'll be missing out on possibilities that we shouldn't be. Are there 14? I thought it was 12. 14 characteristics. Thank you, Jane. In fascism. I need to get around to making a mnemonic for them so that I can remember what the characteristics are. There's several of them that I can remember off the top of my head, but I can probably only get 5 or 6 before I would be grasping to remember the rest of them, and it would be kind of a good idea for me to have some kind of helpful mnemonic to help me remember all of the different ones. But yeah, that's fantastic, Matt. Even the Dem that is running against the incumbent gave the AIPAC money back. Good. Who said bullying politicians on their government voicemails doesn't work? Yeah, and that's what I clapped. Good.
Affirmed that these anarchic principles, which I laid out in part 2 of this series, are indeed those political principles that might underlie an emergent system, then we can also know that those principles are going to be present in their many interfaces in an anarchy that might arise out of that anarchic system. So what this does is it gives us some rational guidance into what kinds of features we might expect to be in that anarchy without saying what it will precisely look like. That is to say, this allows us to talk about what anarchy might be without being utopian, without laying out all of its exact structures.
Also, this is kind of the process of identity by negation. And they might get to this explicitly in part of it, and if I suspect that would be one of the approaches I would go with. Anarchic Fox, welcome in. It's good to see you. Fascists have a tendency to claim it's not fascist unless you check all the boxes, often so that they can keep checking. Right, right. And that's exactly why we need to be, rather than thinking about fascism as something where we go through and we're trying to check the boxes, right? Any one of those things, any one of those characteristics is reason for the rest of us to be concerned about that activity or that behavior or those people who are doing that kind of thing. Any one of those 14 characteristics, that's exactly right. So rather than, if we cannot have an answer, right, and this is an epistemology thing. So in the realm of epistemology, when we're trying to know a thing, and it might be the case that we cannot know certain things about the subject that we would like to know. So rather than going on this fruitless quest that we know is going to be a waste of time, pursuing knowledge that we know that we can't have, what we can do is entertain a process of negation, where rather than trying to find exactly what this is, what we do is we exclude whole possibilities that the thing cannot be, right? If we're talking about an emergent anarchic system, then it would necessarily not be hierarchical, or it would have a very flat hierarchy that had a robust system of checks and balances that all of the members get to add their input into, right? These are necessary thresholds past which we can't go, right? So we can exclude all of those categories past those thresholds, right? And so we might not be able to find out exactly what this kind of system would look like, but we can, by the process of negation, exclude a whole host of possibilities. So it's not that we can't know anything about it. We can know a great deal about it, what it would look like and how it would be structured and how it would function. We can know a great deal. We can't know any of the nitty-gritty specifics, and that's fine. We can have some knowledge about it, even if we can't have specific, concrete details about it.
And mechanisms for dealing with problems. With all that preface out of the way, let's get started on looking at each of those. So the first interface we're going to look at is the interaction of the principle of freedom and the unique. By my analysis, this gives us the concept of bodily autonomy. That is to say, everyone's body is their own. They are the one who makes all final decisions about what will be done with their body. That includes the right to change it or even harm it in any way that they like. Now, we will inspect as we go on here that has limits if it begins to affect others. However, this principle of bodily autonomy still underlies all of our conceptions about what an individual deserves. That is to say, if you are harming no one else with your actions, then you are free to pursue those actions in an anarchy. This would include the right to ingest any substance you like. This would include the right to change your gender. This would include the right to abort a child if it is gestating inside of you. This would include a lot of the basic rights that we consider that every individual should have. And
I have lots of critiques of socialism. Absolutely. You missed a few streams ago. We were talking about ends, means ends, unity. Either way you send it, you say it means the same thing. With means ends unity this is one of the primary reasons why I am not in general in favor of socialism, because I don't believe that we get freedom from the state, that we cannot under any circumstances, ever get freedom from the state. That the existence of the state itself is something which interferes with our freedoms. So socialism is where we depend on the state to enact certain social welfare programs that are good for the people, which I think is generally a good thing. But then what we are doing is we are creating a system where our basic needs are always being facilitated by the state and not by us, not by the means of production, not by the proletariat of dictatorship of the proletariat, not by the people. It's always by the state. Anarchism seems not relevant, possible enough for me to think about, but I might be wrong. And that's so what I've talked about a few times, Apolitical Daddy, and I thought that you were here for these, but I am an anarchist, but I agree with your statement somewhat, that anarchism isn't achievable with the material conditions that we presently have. I also don't think that communism is achievable with the material conditions that we have, but is closer. Anarchism is where I would like to be, but we can't just get there. It's going to take many steps and many processes, and it's going to take us to be in a place where we can get to that place. And we're just not there yet. But I believe that pointing in a direction towards communism is going to put us in a place that's close enough to anarchism that we could conceivably get to anarchism from communism. And again, I don't think that we're quite there to communism yet, but we are way closer to having the material conditions to where we could achieve communism, way closer to that than we are to a state of affairs in which we could achieve anarchism. So I support communism and communist ideas and communist movements because that's going to, I believe, move us to a place where we are closer to be able to get to where I would actually like to be, which is anarchism. The state should be purely administrative to serve. I mean, people are just so greedy/evil. I disagree with that. It is not the case that people are necessarily evil or greedy. We live in a society where humans are conditioned almost from birth to compete with all of their peers for a limited number of resources, for a limited number of opportunities to succeed, and they are encouraged to compete as ruthlessly and relentlessly as possible. Our system systematically rewards people who are willing to exhibit those kinds of behaviors, which is why we have a society which breeds people that you call evil. Right? When you are calling those people evil, you're failing to recognize the ways in which those people are a product of their culture and society. Yep, communism isn't possible as long as capitalism exists. That's why we have socialism. See, and this is, I'm glad that you said that, Matt. And I'm going to push back on that really hard. Not to pick on you in particular, but especially because this is what you have just said in chat there is something that I have said over and over and over and over again on the stream. But I have to admit that I don't actually agree with that. I don't think so. Let me juxtapose one phrase with another phrase, right? So one thing that I do believe is true is that so long as anyone, anywhere is experiencing injustice, none of us have rights. I think that this is true. I don't think it is necessarily the case that communism can exist nowhere as long as capitalism exists anywhere. I used to very much. When I first read State and Revolution, what is it called? That book that we're talking about? State and Revolution, yeah. When I first read State and Revolution, it took me a while to figure out what Lenin really meant by that. And when I figured it out, I completely agreed with it. And I have agreed with it for many, 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 many years. I would say probably about 2.5 years ago, I started to doubt the certainty of that. Just because the Paris Commune, right? Just because capitalism has so far proven to be ruthless and relentless and violently determined to quell any alternative ways of life. I don't know that it has actually been entirely successful in no, here's yes, I do mean that, but it also there's more. We are still talking about it. There's a way in which something is real, meaningfully, metaphysically, which doesn't require it to exist anywhere in the physical world. Right? And I don't want to be too utopian or idealistic with the thing that I'm about to say. But I believe as long as communism exists in people's hearts, such that we never stop driving toward it, that communism does actually exist in a very real, coherent, cogent, important, metaphysical way. Because it exists as a thing which constantly is contending against capitalism. Now, I think that there is, and there's a relationship that Kayamatara has hinted at before, where the two powers are locked in this antagonism, and this antagonism is getting us nowhere, right? The tension that exists between capitalism and the ideal of communism, the specter of communism, or the fear of it existing. There's I thought there was going to be more after that, but that's really all I had to say about that. Just think socialism can have the boundary to be less corruptible, so you can take steps from there in the way of anarchism, communism. But see, but I don't think that that's the case, Apolitical Daddy, or I fear that won't be the case, because okay, good. So let's talk a little bit more about prefiguration, right? For what prefiguration is about. What prefiguration is about this thing becoming the kind of being which does certain things in the world, accomplishes certain kinds of things in the world. And for this being to figure out what those things are supposed to be, this being needs to engage in praxis, in working with... What happened to my closed captions? My closed captions were working earlier, were they not? Let's see. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Anyways, right. So, right. The point of making this a different thing so that it does certain kinds of things in the world is because you can't just make the world different. You can't do that. That's not the way that the world works. You have to change you. You need to learn how to be the kind of being that can do the kinds of things that a free society needs people to do. And you don't know what those kinds of things are because you don't live in a free society. These things have to work together. This is means, ends, unity. So you have to be working towards the ends that you want. And you can't use different means to get there. You have to use the ends that you want to see in the world. The kind of world that you want to build is the kinds of things that this agent needs to be able to employ in their everyday lives as they're going about trying to accomplish that goal. This is most clearly enunciated with the idea of a bloody revolution. The idea that revolutionaries can just kill enough of the people on the other side, and then there you go, we can have our glorious peaceful revolution, right? But if you are the kind of person who murders other people to accomplish your ends, then you are a tyrant. You cannot make a good, peaceful, long-lasting revolution if you're a murderous shitbag, right? That's part of means ends unity. If you're the kind of person that is okay just executing people because of their beliefs, you're the fascist. Right? Now you're the fascist. And the world that you will make will be fascist. That's means ends unity. If you're using those tactics to get to the end goal, those tactics become built into the end goal. So, if you are using the tactics of depending on the state to meet people's needs and to dole out people's rights, that becomes a part of your telos. That will be baked into the conclusion that you get, because that's the means that you have used to get there. You can't get to there without, right, you can't use those means and then expect them to not show up in the end result. Hey, welcome in, Nisa. It's great to see you. I hope you're doing well. And that's with Matt. That's every time people try to create collective systems and live outside of capitalism, they murder everyone. I know, right? I get it. That has historically been the case, and I think that it would be foolish and naive and a massive mistake for any of us to not be very real about that. That if we try to build dual state structures, if we try to liberate people from capitalism, capitalism will try to kill us, right? That's part of the, so long as capitalism exists anywhere, communism or socialism can exist nowhere. That part checks out, because capitalism will always violently seek to eradicate any alternative ways of life, any alternative choices. And this is really one of those telling things. This is something that you might use if you have somebody who's kind of on the fence as to whether they think that capitalism is evil or not. This, historically, capitalism always seeks out any alternative lifestyle and then seeks to eradicate that as thoroughly as possible. Because if people have any other option, if people can see any alternative, if people believe that there are things that they can do, states of affairs which are not capitalism, people will always, 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 always choose not capitalism. If people have a choice, if people can see options, if people can see that there are other ways of living, they will always, always, always choose not capitalism. Unless capitalism is putting a gun in everyone's face and making them do the thing. So that part of the statement checks out. What I mean, though, is that I think that there are ways that we can go about building community structures which do undermine that. To the extent that they can stay under the radar is the concern, is the thing that I think might be the goal that I'm pushing toward, right? Might be the thing that I'm thinking of here, that we might need to incorporate in our tactics, that we can try to find ways to exist in meaningful physical ways in the real world, that we can actually give people freedoms. I think that is achievable. I just don't know how yet. It's something that I'm working out the theory of it, but I believe we'll probably just see the truth of it working out in praxis at some point in real life, and then I'll go, look, look there, whenever that finally happens. I've been kind of ignoring you guys over on YouTube. Sorry about that. We need to start locally. Absolutely. That's not socialism. That's social democracy. Well, okay, that's true. There is some nuance to be had there between socialism and social democracy. You can see the practice of communism and anarchism within societies that are highly capitalistic. Capitalism has not wiped out the other ways of being, but it sure as hell suppresses those ways of being. Right. Yes. And that's true. I hadn't thought about that too. There are flat structures. Right. There are flat structure companies which actually exist, quite successfully. And that kind of pushes back against that idea. So, I mean, now that I think about it, that doesn't really count. Never mind. That's not a great example. Scratch that. We need to always have self-defense in order to deal with the looming threat of oppression. Yes. Yes. We need to always be prepared for violence. And self-defense. We can talk about self-defense strategies. That's not going to violate TOS. Let's talk about Machiavelli. Okay. Sometimes, because I almost always see that philosophy being used negatively, and I'm intrigued to talk about it outside the good, bad, non-binary. Right. And I'm actually a Machiavelli is probably a good guy. Side of things. For a long time, historians thought that Machiavelli was trying to help the king rule, the prince rule in a more iron fist kind of way. But I don't read Machiavelli's work that way at all. I read Machiavelli's work as trying to pull the mask off, right? Of dispelling a lot of the mystique around power and the way that power consolidates and protects itself, right? I think that there's Machiavelli does a really great job of helping us understand power structures and emergent structures and the way that power seeks to destroy the possibility of anything new and emergent, right? These are relationships that correlate with each other for good reason, right? It's not coincidence there. Come to the dark side. I have unbaked cookies. I do love unbaked cookies. I also like baked cookies, but I'm a big fan of unbaked cookies. I like what is the name brand? There's I think it's like baked. I can't remember what it is. There's a company that makes medicated cookie dough. It's good raw. It's good as cookies, but it's also good raw. All states of cookies, they are enjoyed. Yes. All states of cookies. And I like pretty much all kinds of cookies. They're oatmeal raisin, okay, that's an iffy cookie. I'm not mad about a nice warm oatmeal raisin cookie so long as I'm properly warned that they're oatmeal raisin cookies and that I'm not expecting chocolate chips, because if I'm expecting chocolate chips and I get raisins, I'm not going to be happy with states of affairs. Yes, exactly. I'm not mad if you give me a warm oatmeal cookie with raisins in it. I'm not mad about it at all. Thank you for the cookie. But if there are options, I will take not that option. I will take any other cookie that doesn't have nuts, because I'm also allergic to nuts. So I really like pecan sandies. Oh, when I was a kid, that was one of my all-time favorites, was pecan sandies. But I can't do pecans anymore. That's a sweet granola bar, right? Yeah, I like oatmeal raisins. Yeah, I like oatmeal raisin a lot. Well, and it's if I'm making oatmeal, raisins go in that pretty often. Though I like cranberries. I prefer cranberries over raisins, and generally prefer raisins over blueberries, but that depends on the mood I'm in. I like blueberries in my oatmeal. I like cranberries, but I also like raisins, but not a combination. I am not a mixer. Though one combination that I do mess with sometimes is dates. If you get the little dried dates, and dates and raisins sometimes make a good combination. But favorite cookie is Reese's Pieces. Yeah, I also can't do that. I used to not have problems with the Reese's Pieces, but now that's too much peanut butter, and that bothers me. I think maybe it's not as important which of socialism, communism, anarchism is the best. I think that number one priority for me is explaining people why capitalism sucks, right? I got aware of how bad capitalism was by accident before I listened a long time to someone I disagreed with when I was left-leaning, progressive liberal. Right. Yes. And that's really a good point, actually, Apolitical Daddy. Splitting hairs about it is really not that super important. So there is some value if we want to go back and there's a whole lot more going over here. I thought I was caught up. Where was the comment that was Zapatistas in Chiapas, New Mexico, or Chiapas, Mexico is one example. I love using Zapatistas as an example. Oh, and that's that's in reference to self-defense. Yes, also good example. I can't elaborate on that, but go read up on the Zapatistas if you're not familiar with that. Yes, we are going to get back to the video. We got quite distracted there, didn't we? Yeah, let's get this back on track. But thank you for the for getting us for that tangent, Apolitical Daddy. That was a good one. Let's get back to the video.
Any good society. Next, I look at the interaction of the unique have in any good society. Next, I look at the interaction of the unique and ownness. So here we see the individual values in interface. And the property that I think this uncovers is the concept of individual power. This is, of course, a very broad category, but you might expect as much. This is the interaction of those individualist principles. This is the realm of personal apprehension. This is your personal property. This is everybody that you interact with, that is your friends and your family and those that you have bonds of love and affection with. Those would all actually be included in this aspect of individual power. Now, this is not exhaustive of all of those connections, as obviously we are going to see that there are a lot more connections to be discussed when we include solidarity and freedom and equality and so on. However, this is that simple principle that which you apprehend, that which you touch and interact with, it's sort of part of your selfhood. That is to say, an anarchy should not go about violating this basic principle of the expansion of individual power, once again, unless it comes to harm another person. Next, I look at the interaction of freedom and ownness. It seems to me that the interaction of freedom and ownness justifies the principle of usufruct. So some of you may not be familiar with this principle of usufruct, but usufruct is essentially that one owns something that they are using, that they are interacting with. And this actually leads to a different kind of property norm called usufruct property. And in this sense, we also get some part of collective ownership, because usufruct relations say that the only people who own any given thing are those who use it. So a factory can only be owned by the workers in the factory. It cannot be owned through absentee or private ownership in that sense. You can't own the factory because you can't run the factory all by yourself. A person can only quote unquote own something to the degree that they are engaged in using it and that they can fully apprehend and utilize it. This also means that if a person is not utilizing a thing for a considerable length of time, that they sort of give up their ownership of that thing. And someone who can better utilize that property will then gain ownership over that property through their de facto usage of that property. This means that even if, say, there was a group of workers that owned a factory beforehand because they utilized it, if they all stopped utilizing that factory, they no longer own the factory. The people who then go on to operate the factory after them would take ownership of it. We see here a very fluid conception of property rights. And it should also be said, this one goes really far back. Usufruct property relations are actually at the foundation of all leftist thought. This is the alternative to private property. Next, I want to look at the interface of solidarity and the unique. It seems to me that the interface of solidarity and the unique gives us Bookchin's principle of what he calls unity in diversity. So unity in diversity is basically this recognition that it is in the safeguarding of a society of diversity where people are different, where everybody has a different identity, they have a different past, they have different powers and capabilities, that we are actually better off. We don't need a society where unity is based around sameness. Instead, what we should be trying to do is safeguard a society where diversity is a strength. And it's interesting because this is another one of those occasions where we've sort of reproduced one of the pieces of complex systems analysis. And that is, systems with lots of diverse components are actually more powerful than systems that have very uniform components.
So let me take a moment to tie this video in with the topic, with the title of the stream, leftist perfectionism. So on last Friday's stream, there was something that Kaimatara brought up where I said, well, I was juxtaposing two different ideas of perfect. And there's the common use of perfect, which is flawless, having no errors. And this is something that we think of as idealistic or utopian. It's not actually really actually achievable in any real sense. But then there's this other kind of perfect, where rather than accepting or expecting that subjects are flawless, we understand them as perfect in themselves, with their flaws and inconsistencies, in that they fit in a mosaic of life that is diverse and unique and vividly interesting. Right? And one thing that I think is true, one thing that I find to be true, human bodies are beautiful. Period. That doesn't need qualification, right? Human bodies are beautiful. Human in that those humans are perfect, right? And that goes for everyone. That despite our flaws and despite our how broken we are, how downtrodden we are by the system, no matter how discouraged we become, you are all beautiful. You are amazing and fantastic, and you are perfect. That doesn't mean that there's not ways that you can improve your life, and you should not ever stop trying to improve your life. But you can be perfect and still try to aspire to something greater with this different kind of understanding of perfect. So then has to do with the title, right? What is it that we expect from our leftist movement, from our leftist organizations? Do we expect them to be perfect in this has no flaws kind of utopian way? Or do we expect our leftist organizing to be perfect in that it's going to be messy and it's going to involve us making mistakes, right? And that's still the right way. That's still good. That's still, I don't know. Juxtaposing these ideas, and I think this is appropriate. I expect intersectionality. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Just trying to think if there's sometimes when I think about the things that I'm going to say on stream, I'll rehearse things over in my head. And when I say them in my head, I'm like, yeah, that's really, yeah. And then when I say them out loud, sometimes I'm like, did I even get it? Did I say this right? Do I even know what I'm talking about? So when it comes out, sometimes I'm like, because that's the point. That's the point. I think I made the point. And I'm out of words to make the point, so I'm just going to get back to the video.
Systems that have very uniform components. If some kind of disastrous choosing filter comes through, then that one kind of way of being just gets eliminated all at once. Whereas when you have a diversity of different kinds of agents, what that means is that only the ones that were affected by that sort of devastation, that sort of choosing filter that came through, then only those get pruned out in the process. And those who responded well to that will therefore then be strengthened. And I don't mean for this to in any way sound callous. This is just part of how reality works. There's always different kinds of hurdles and challenges that are going to confront us, both as individuals and as a collectivity. And if we have a bunch of extremely similar, uniform components, we are not going to be able to overcome a bunch of diverse difficulties that might face our society. Whereas if we have very diverse components, then we actually are going to be able to overcome those things by way of utilizing people's diverse and unique strengths. It's basically to say that we all have a unified interest in safeguarding that diversity. That diversity is not something that has to separate us from one another, but is instead something that unifies us together. The next is this interface between solidarity and ownness. And what it seems to me that this interface is expressing is the concept of social ownership. Given that this is about the expansion of one's ownness, their apprehension of the world, yet also it's about solidarity and bonds of cooperation, here we see that everybody actually achieves this maximal ownness in cooperation and sharing of resources. This also justifies why we might have much broader collective ownership, even of things that we don't immediately apprehend, through the use of some formal bodies and organizations.
So one of the things that I went on and on and on and on and on and on about weeks ago is that which we have epistemological access to. And this is going on the tangent of diversity, right? We were talking about how just being exposed to different people with differing viewpoints and different experiences of the world can actually open up whole doors, whole corridors of possibilities, of ideas and options and ways of understanding the world that you would not have at all been clued into. And when we open up these avenues of epistemological access, we find that they're not just a door, it's not just a single corridor. What we find is a whole tree with a whole bunch of different branches and a whole bunch of different roots going back metaphorically, right, that intersect with all of the other things that we know and understand in much more nuanced and complex ways. And the way that we get access to new epistemological avenues are through other people, through other people's experiences of the world, through getting somebody else's perspective of the thing that we already know about. Getting somebody else's perspective helps us understand our own understanding better, right? And that's the idea that of the value that diversity brings. It's not just that we live in a plurality and ought to respect each other. It's foolish not to, because if we respect each other, then we get all of the awesome benefits of living in a culture and society where people are supported by that culture and society. Doesn't that sound awesome? Right? Like, because we don't have that world right now. I was not a long tangent, but a little tangent. We not only do we not teach life skills anymore, right? We got rid of home ec and shop and a lot of the other classes in school that used to teach you life skills. But we have also eradicated most of private life in a very significant way. right? Families used to spend most of their lives together, spending time with each other, building a home, right? Children are kneading the dough with their parents and helping their parents tend the garden and helping their parents care for their grandparents. And right there, we're all spending a lot of time with each other, working together to share with each other life skills. And none of that happens anymore. Right? Our entire private lives have been robbed from us and ripped from us. So we spend all of our time at work or at leisure, and nothing in between, right? That's it's a little aside that doesn't have a lot to do with this, but does have to do with this. It's the same. It's that same kind of thing. All right, well, let's get back to the video.
As these are representations of our ability to cooperate at larger and larger scales and to share and reappropriate and to distribute the property that we all hold in common through our utilization and need. This then also leads us to the justification for socialism, which is worker ownership of the means of production. But I mean to say more broadly, social ownership of the means of production. Private property, after all, leads to the limitation of ownness because now everybody doesn't have access to all of this collective property, which they very much have an interest in utilizing for their own good. If we don't share, we get far, far less than if we all did share. This is one of those many aspects where the system acts as more than the sum of its parts. Then we have the interface of equality and solidarity. Now, in my work, I've called this the principle of democracy or consensus. However, I understand that this word, democracy, is kind of a hot button issue among anarchists, so I've thought in later versions of this script to change this word to maybe free agreement or something so that we can develop a little more consensus upon the topic. However, I think which word we use is really irrelevant. What we're talking about is a concept.
Would a rose by any other name smell so sweet?
This concept, which we are calling democracy or free agreement or consensus, is all aimed at the same purpose. We are trying to get some form of very high agreement on the things that we all plan to do. We're trying to meet the desires of many different people through the utilization of a method where we all come together, we propose things, we deliberate upon them, we amend them to our needs, and we pass them such that we satisfy our needs. This process of formal deliberation is incredibly important. The less formal this process of deliberation, the more that we are going to get people with all kinds of different ideas about how things are going to proceed. And even though, yes, we want lots of diversity in society, we don't want this situation where people's diverse interests and diverse needs act at the expense of other people. What we're trying to do is coordinate people's collective interests together. And so some form of formal deliberation, which some anarchists might call democracy, others will call free agreement, and in the modern day we more tend to call consensus, each of these are aiming at that specific need to deliberate and coordinate our actions together as to achieve our collective goals. The less that we are able to coordinate our actions together to achieve these collective goals, the less we're going to achieve those collective goals. And what we're going to have is situations where fewer and fewer people are benefited from some particular decision instead of us trying to take into consideration how we can have win-wins. if we just go about serving the self-interest of individuals or small groups which are making these decisions without deliberation at a larger scale, this leads to a system where we undercut collective interest in the interests of individuals.
Actually, I think I'm not ready to say anything yet. Never mind.
So it leads to a society which further and further atomizes instead of coordinating at the necessary scales to get things that we all want. Also, this process of a formal, deliberative system puts us all in the room together such that we have to talk out our problems instead of just running off to the forest and, ignoring everybody else in society and just trying to get what we need individually. This places us in face-to-face situations where we actually have to recognize these other people in our daily lives, the people who will be affected by our decisions, and those people then can see how we are going to be affected by their decisions. If there is no such...
And this is where we get into a situation, again, addressing one of the things that Apolitical Daddy brought up, the idea that there are going to be people that we can't trust, some people that are going to be evil or who are just going to be just abuse the system. And I find that kind of possibility increasingly less likely when we remove systems of alienation, right? When it is the case, as Anarch is explaining, when it is the case that the thing that you, not you, anybody in particular, but the thing that you want to do in society, when you are trying to do that, but the consequence is that it's doing harm to these people who you have to face every day. While you're trying to advocate for the thing that you want, you have to look those people in the eye and say to their face that you want to do things that were going to abuse them and their way of life or interfere with their interest or the things that they want. And it's very likely that in a society where we've removed many of the systems of alienation, that your life will directly depend on that person in some regard. They're going to be your shoemaker or your baker or your roofer or your nurse, right? We'll be in a society where we are working towards mutual cooperation. And in that society where you have to negotiate your wills and your wants and desires, I think we will have less and less situations where people are advocating for things which are not in the interest of others who are around them, because they'll have to advocate to those people to their face, right? Against their interests. So that's something that in this process we eliminate. Not just those, we're not eliminating those people. We're eliminating we're re-envisioning the social space in which we cooperate. And that social space is not the kind of space in which it'll be easy or reasonable to abuse others or to abuse the commons or to act or to want to do things that are not in everybody's interest. That will be an increasingly less, a problem of less and less proportion as time goes on in this kind of system.
Such formal structure for deliberation, then you're going to end up with a system that is atomized and chaotic to a fault. And recall, as we discussed in the previous part, that being too chaotic or too ordered is bad. You want to rest on the edge of chaos. The next interface we want to look at is the interface between equality and freedom, that which I call communal power. So recall that equality is about equality of access to structural power, and freedom is about the largest degrees of freedom being available to any given person. So here, this is expressing the concept that we are all more powerful in coordination with one another, that our freedom to do things, the extent and variety of our power is actually increased by way of our access to structural power. And that together, through our collective access to this structural power, we all become more powerful, and socially, we become more powerful than just the addition of all of our individual pieces. I feel like in the previous interfaces I've already been covering that I've kind of already elaborated on why this is a good thing and something we should focus on, so I won't belabor the point too much here. Next, we have the interface between equality and the unique. And in my conception, this leads us to the concept of subsidiarity. Now, I recognize this word, subsidiarity, is not a common word, and probably almost no one is familiar with it. The concept of subsidiarity is pretty simple, and that is, issues should be dealt with in the smallest relevant body that is available. But I should add, the people who are the pertinent decision makers are always going to be those who are affected. You might recall this from previous videos that I've done. One of the key principles that guides the anarchist analysis is that those who are affected should decide. And this is directly in line with this principle of subsidiarity in a few different ways. One is that those who are affected, that is the smallest relevant unit that needs to make decisions. But this is also a richly mediated principle because those who are affected can expand considerably to include more and more people. In this sense, subsidiarity then expands as it needs to in order to include all of the people who have relevant knowledge and who will be affected by any given decision that we all come together to make. I think this principle is really, really important in that it manages a balance between complexity and legibility, you might say. It gives us a rule of thumb for how to involve different people in the decision-making process. And it tells us whether we have or have not included the right people in that decision-making process. The next is the interface between equality and ownness. And I believe this is the underlying justification for delegation. It's kind of a balancing principle between these two features. That is to say, it is a way for us to balance the expansion of individual ownness with everybody's need to have equality of access to structural power. In fact, it's this seeming friction that a lot of people point to and say anarchism cannot deal with specialization of labor. If indeed everybody's supposed to have equality of access to structural power, and we want to have a society which emphasizes bodily autonomy, how do we do that? The anarchist answers delegation. That is to say, the anarchist is not against people with expertise being put in positions where they can carry out their expertise without constantly having to check back with some sort of council structure. People can be temporarily or even permanently in some sense delegated to different tasks. We don't need to, for example, constantly ad hoc choose who the doctors in our hospitals are going to be. It's fine for us to say these people are delegated as doctors. However, this principle of delegation is distinctly different from how hierarchical systems deal with specialization of labor. In delegation, you are always able to revoke that person's position as a delegate. This is a collective decision. We sometimes call this temporary and revocable delegation. I think the important distinction to understand with delegation is that the person who is a delegate serves at the whim of this collective body, whereas in a hierarchical structure, that person is sort of embedded into that position by way of the decisions of somebody at the very top, or people that are in positions as hiring managers, for example, or in the Republic in the form of voting for representatives. This delegate never takes on decision-making power from these collective bodies. They merely carry out the decisions that were already made by those collective bodies. That is to say, they are given a mandate by the collective bodies about what the scope of things they are allowed to do is. The next interface I want to look at is solidarity and freedom. I called this interface mutualistic social power. I think it's best to think of this as the raw, unmediated power of society, sort of that spontaneous force of human beings to do things. This isn't mediated through power structures, but also I should say that it is harmonious. That is to say that this is not just a general social power, which would include a bunch of competing hierarchical relations between people. I would just call that social power more broadly because it might include both hierarchical and horizontal structures. But here what I'm talking about is sort of that horizontal social power, what I'm calling mutualistic social power. This is just like you need a table and your friend has an extra table, so they give you a table. This is you see a person who is sick, so you come over and you help them. This is all of those social powers that we have that aren't formal and organizational in nature. And it should be noted that I think when I've talked to a lot of individualist anarchists, this is what they view as doing everything in an anarchist society. They think that this sort of mutualistic social power is going to spontaneously organize anything and everything that people need. You know, the same principle as I said, like someone needs a table, they get it from a friend. Like they seem to think that this is going to be the principle that organizes things at all scales. I personally, as you can see from having all of these interfaces, think that that is very insufficient for managing society. However, I will bracket that tangent. So that's all the two-way interfaces. However, I also went through and started thinking about some of the three-way interfaces. I should note that so they give you a table.
Just processing for a moment. Yes. That's what I was going to say. So I could get anarchists making this kind of silly mistake if they don't understand the importance of prefiguration, right? That's to assume that all of our organizing concerns will just be worked out. We'll just, someone will see the need and then do the thing, right? That just to assume that that's gonna be the way that things work is somebody that doesn't understand the process of prefiguration and their responsibility in being a prefigurative being, right? That is doing the planning. Because if you were involved in doing any kind of social planning, you would know that people don't just take it upon themselves. These kind of things don't just occur all of the time. That we would need some kinds of formal structures, that we would need bodies or councils or groups whose sole purpose was X, right? We of course we're going to need some kinds of specializations. What we need, I can't say, right? We can't make explicit claims about what those anarchists would be doing and how they would want to organize themselves and what kind of things that they need. But yeah, someone is going to have to make big things, right? Yes, and there will have to be large projects that somebody goes, what we really need is for 200 or 300 people to get together and build this dam, or to make a massive silo, or to do something that we need, right? And that's not something that one person just organically whips up a bunch of people. It would require organization and people to come together, organize their efforts in very formal ways. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know about that recommendation, Matt, but if you take everything in there at face value, then yeah, I guess. But it's not like anybody does. But do you have any recommendations on socialism or communism? The book that I usually recommend to people is the one that got mentioned by Lenin earlier, State and Revolution. I think that's really one of the best introductory texts into understanding communist/socialism. If you've already read that, or if you're looking for something much more advanced, Das Kapital. That's the book. That's the best book that Marx ever wrote on Marxism, in my opinion. Right, there's an argument too. There was a work that was published posthumously, that I don't remember the title of it, but it's an organized, it's an amalgamation of notes and other projects that were slapped together into one. And it's really apparently brilliant, but I haven't read that one. A good one. Yeah, the Bible. But yeah, that's what I would recommend. Das Kapital is my favorite. Well, when I say my favorite, what I mean is when it comes to understanding the dense philosophy and the relationships between all the stuff that's going on, Das Kapital that's the one. Don't even bother to read the Communist Manifesto. It's okay as a general impression, right? But you have more than a general impression. You already understand enough about socialism/communism that the Communist Manifesto isn't going to do you any good. Yeah, there you go. Read after Phenomenology of Perception. That's I'm glad that you're reading Phenomenology of Perception, Apolitical Daddy. If you have any questions on that, it's one of my all-time favorite works. I know it really quite well. If you have questions about it, I would almost guarantee that I can flip to the page and I've got notes written in my book on that page about whatever concerns you guys. So I've got lots of notes in that book. It's a good one. I believe that Merleau-Ponty offers the best account of the experience of metaphysics. Period. That just is, it's so far, philosophically speaking, the best account of what it is like to be a being experiencing being in time. Being in time from Heidegger was pretty close. That was my favorite. Previously, that was my favorite philosophical text until I read Phenomenology of Perception. Oh, that's awesome. Reading it with your uncle. That's really cool. Yeah, absolutely. Just hit me up if you've got any questions. We'll do a little book clubbing on it. Nice.
This is, you see a person who is sick, so you come over and you help them. This is all of those social powers that we have that aren't formal and organizational in nature. And it should be noted that I think when I've talked to a lot of individualist anarchists, this is what they view as doing everything in an anarchist society. They think that this sort of mutualistic social power is going to spontaneously organize anything and everything that people need. You know, the same principle as I said, like someone needs a table, they get it from a friend. Like they seem to think that this is going to be the principle that organizes things at all scales. I personally, as you can see from having all of these interfaces, think that that is very insufficient for managing society. However, I will bracket that tangent. So that's all the two-way interfaces. However, I also went through and started thinking about some of the three-way interfaces. I should note that is about as far as it went. I did not go on to then analyze the four-way interfaces because the script was already getting kind of long. And also, when I started to inspect them, they really didn't seem like they were bringing much new to the table. It seemed like they were more or less now just agglomerating together into describing combinations of all of the features that I just laid out in those other interfaces. However, the three-way interfaces still remained pretty useful. They did continue to offer some insight. So I'm going to recount some of those three-way interfaces as well. The first is the interface between freedom, unique, and ownness. And as far as I can see, what this represents is the broader principle of autonomy, not just individual autonomy, but also collective autonomy. That is to say, every group of beings, insofar as that they are harming no one else and they abide by their agreements with other people, should also be free to do what they like within their collective. The same conception that led our discussion of bodily autonomy previously should also be held as a collective right. And the reason why this is now being included is because now it's including the principle of equality in that analysis. And recall, once again, equality is equality of access to structural power. That is to say, collectives should be able to determine for themselves what their unique interactions together are and what kind of society they want in miniature within their collective to be carried out. And you might think that this leads us to the concept of free association, but that one is coming up on another one of our three-way interfaces. Next, we have the interface between solidarity, ownness, and freedom. And in my conception, at least, when I thought through this three-way interface, this is basically a representation of communism. That is to say, when you think about how these three principles interact with one another, you have the reasoning for why we want a stateless, classless, moneyless society, number one. But number two, why we are trying to develop a situation where we are distributing all of the economic goods from each according to their ability to each according to their need. It's only under the solidaric conditions that we will ever all develop our ownness to the maximum extent. Solidarity, for obvious reasons, it's a society wherein everything is being distributed based on need. Ownness, because communism is about property relations, or rather the lack of traditional property relations. And freedom, because this leads to a society where we all have the greatest extent and variety of power too. Next, we have the unique, solidarity, and equality. And at least in my conception, this is what justifies the concept of confederation. And that's because confederation comes about by balancing the needs of unique groups of people while also still valuing the need for the balance of structural power and the extent of power too for everybody involved. What is confederation? Well, confederation is essentially when you take a bunch of smaller bodies and then you combine them into groups at larger and larger scales in order to deal with problems. Confederation is a way of valuing the autonomy of individual councils and their needs for subsidiarity, while also allowing all of these groups to coordinate together at all of the necessary scales to make collective decisions. Next is the interface of freedom, solidarity, and the unique. And I believe that what's taking place at this interface is the justification for complementarity. Here we have recovered another conception that Bookchin talks a lot about. Complementarity is the situation that arises when diverse components actually empower one another by their continued presence. That is to say, it is the situation where even though we are unique, we have different powers, we have different needs, and so on, these don't lead to a situation where we act at the expense of one another, but instead we are empowered through the way that we interact with one another. The fact
I don't know that I've ever understood this concept quite this way. I always thought of it more like a universal principle like we would see with Immanuel Kant's non-interference, the grounding for rights, right? I'm just processing. This is I feel like I'm learning something new about something I already know quite a lot about right now in this instant.
That there is somebody whose special interest is being a dentist empowers me so that I don't have to go become a dentist. I can be interested in political theory or philosophy or being an artist. And we are all better off in this situation where we all focus on our own particular desires and needs.
Because everybody else is free to be the kind of person that they would like to be, that further empowers me to be the kind of person that I want to be. And again, I was thinking of it in kind of a universal non-interference kind of way like Immanuel Kant. I have the freedom to do anything that doesn't interfere with anybody else's freedom, such that everybody else has that same freedom, such that they don't interfere with my freedom, right? That there was a universal comparability there. And that's here, that is true. But there is an aspect of this that it's been a while since I've read Bookchin, but I don't think that I got this more powerful idea the first time the last time I read. It's not the first time I've read Bookchin over and over. But that's some nuance there that I might have missed.
That is to say, this is a lot like what's happening in unity and diversity, but it's at a even larger, even structural.
Yeah, exactly, apolitical daddy. Exactly. Yes.
Scale. Next, we have the interface between equality, solidarity, and ownness. Next, we have the interaction between equality, solidarity, and ownness. And I believe this is the justification for what Bookchin calls the irreducible minimum. As I inspected this interface, I actually had somewhat of an issue trying to discern it from communism. However, I think what's happening at this interface is it's just describing why it is that everyone deserves some basic standard of living. I think this one's also really important in understanding how the society would model disability justice, because it basically lays out that no one can be deprived of some of the basic needs of any human being, and therefore the society has to meet those basic needs for anyone and everyone, including those who have different kinds of disabilities. However, it also includes the reasoning for why we have to watch after the sick and the infirm and the elderly. Basically,
they just have a book for a chin. Right. That's a good one.
Have to set a floor below which no one can descend. Otherwise, we would just not have a livable and humane society. Then we have the interface of the unique, ownness, and solidarity. And I believe this is where we find the principle of free association. So what is free association? Free association is essentially the principle that people should not be forced to associate with those they do not want to associate with. That is to say, people should be free to disassociate from any organization or group of people that they would like to disassociate from.
And that's Jane's conception of freedom, right? The privilege or ability to disassociate from whatever you'd like not to.
It also means that they can choose to associate with any given group of people, regardless of what anybody says about that. This leads to the possibility that there could be development of new federations if there were problems, as well as the defederation of given structures if those structures determined that they did not want to associate with broader confederations. Free association is a very important principle because without free association, then you are also not valuing a lot of the other things that were on this list, including confederation, autonomy, and many others. The last one is solidarity, equality, and freedom. And this one I call horizontal society. So in my videos, I talk about this concept of Cree-order. Cree-order is a concept that was developed by theorists Bickler and Nitzan. It's very similar to what Marx talks about with social reproduction. It is essentially the dynamic process by which some system or society maintains itself. It is all of the internal mores and norms which, when followed through, develop and redevelop. They enforce and reinforce the social conditions as they stand. And as far as I can see, that's what occurs in the interface of these three social anarchist values of freedom, equality, and solidarity. These are essentially the principles that we would have to follow in order to maintain a horizontal Cree-order. Together, these ensure that we have a society of cooperation and reconciliation instead of conflict. Moreover, this is the principle which suppresses the reemergence of hierarchical power structures. So that's it for the interfaces of the 5 values. For now, I think this does a very good job of laying out where all of these principles that anarchists advocate actually arise from. Moreover, what I want to emphasize is that we've avoided utopian thinking by instead asking ourselves, what does the universe require to function? What are the necessary aspects of a system that demonstrates emergence? And then we took the political theoretic parallels to all of those principles and we looked at all of their interactions. And what we see when we inspect each of those interactions is that they produce all kinds of principles that the anarchists and social ecologists like Murray Bookchin had already found were necessary for a better society. Looks like Morticia is going to join us for the wrap up here. But what I'm trying
racism or anarchism? I don't understand what the question was. I must have missed it. I also don't understand why not both. But that's okay. It's okay. I don't always get the stuff. I'm on the spectrum. I don't always get stuff. It's something that I'm just used to. It's okay.
trying to say is that when we look at the interactions of these 5 values, we see that once again, the anarchists have intuited a bunch of liberatory principles of the sort of society we might want to create. And this is important because in order for us to move from here to there, we have to know what there even looks like. And so what I've tried to do with the production of these values and this inspection is give us a grounded reasoning as to how these future conditions might look, so that we're not just kind of like reasoning pie in the sky about abstractions that have no fundamental structure or reasoning. Instead, we can be confident that what we've arrived at here is something very solid. It's based in scientific evidence and reasoning from complex systems analysis. It's also important because now that we understand what it is that we're trying to achieve, we can now begin discussing how we will achieve it. That is to say, the subject of the next videos is going to be revolution. However, for today, we're just going to leave it there because that was a lot, kind of a shotgun of concepts, so I hope that wasn't too exhausting or confusing in the process. You should go down into the comments and ask me any questions you have, and hopefully I'll be able to find time to answer them.
I think we're good on the wrap up. Yeah, it was lots of dense concepts, and it wasn't just a barrage of dense concepts. Those concepts are immediately slammed together and used in ways that are kind of unusual when we're thinking about well, not really, kind of unusual for how we think about those concepts in our everyday lives. It's not unusual when we're thinking about how to organize political systems. That's how you organize. That's how you think about how to organize those political systems. But it's not the way that you would ordinarily think about these concepts in your everyday life. NPR cadence that he was speaking. My only critique is the NPR cadence that he was speaking. NPR had trouble keeping up with this video, but he did a good job explaining it. Well, Apolitical Daddy 2, you weren't here for the last two video. This is the third in a series. So you missed the first two videos. It might be a good idea here. Let me drop the link. This one. There we go. Copy. Let me drop the link here. And then this will take you to this video, and then it'll also link you to parts 1 and 2, which would be very helpful, right? In understanding anarchism as a distinct philosophy from socialism and or communism. This would be a really great place to get started in having a mature, nuanced understanding of the differences. Cadence, like the rhythm of his words. Okay. Oh, the NPR style, as in, right, a National Public Radio is that it's kind of dry. So far as content creation goes, this is really pretty dry delivery. I think is what your point is, and I do agree with that. I really like dry content. It's one of the reasons why I like Zoe Baker so much, is because there's not a lot of bells and whistles or a whole lot of hoopla. So like Lucid Fox. Lucid Fox is a streamer that does a lot of the bells and whistles, and that's cool. That's really cool. I'm not a bells and whistles kind of person. I don't have anything bad to say about Lucid Fox. I think that they're a really cool person. I'd love to hang out with them in real life, right? I think that they've got some pretty good takes, but I like less bells and whistles in my streaming content. So I like Struggle 4, or somebody that's less about the bells and whistles and less about the entertainment and more about just getting to the grit. That's A matter of preference, I guess there. You have an anarchism. I'm not really quite sure if you're autistic anarchist. Do you have anarchism? Probably. Sure. Yeah, no, I'm absolutely a nerd level boss. um, but no, and this is my the kind of content that I like. That's it's also um organized academically. This one of the difficulties that people have when they're trying to engage in academic content is that it's not clear to them what they're reading or how they're reading. When you read an article on most news websites anymore these days, the article is going to give you a few relevant pieces of information right up front, and then they're going to spoon feed you some of the ideas around them and lead you down a breadcrumb of ideas so that you can get what is being talked about. Academia doesn't do all that shit. Academia says, this is what we're going to talk about, and we're going to go through it in this particular order and address it analytically. And that's what it does. There's an order, there's a procession, there is a cadence that goes along with the presentation of information, which is, now that I think about it, your NPR comment really is illustrative of that, because NPR pieces are often written academically, and then somebody has to go back and say, this is not going to work for radio at all, and they have to actually doll it up a little bit for NPR, because it's just so analytically rigorous. But yeah, that's I think what's going on there. Entertaining videos do seem less accurate most of the time. Well, and that's something that so I haven't gotten into this yet. So there's something that's for months this has been bothering me, actually. Something that I've been interested in is there's some online beef between Philosophy Tube, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, and some other content creators. We'll just leave it there. I'm not going to start digging up names yet. But there's some beef, and the beef is, to me, hilarious. Because the content creators who are beefing around Philosophy Tube, the thing that they're beefing about, they are literally engaging with by having a beef with Philosophy Tube in the first place. But and one of the reasons why I haven't really jumped into this is because I haven't really thought very carefully about how I feel about this yet. So I'm going to start to throw some ideas out, and keep in mind that I'm not committed to any of the things that I'm about to say. But there is a standing critique in philosophy, academic philosophy, of pop philosophy. And we might consider Philosophy Tube to be pop philosophy. Now I like Abby. I've been following them for a long time. I've consumed most of their content. Right. So far as and when we're talking about a YouTube content creator who's been making content for about a decade now, if somebody can say that they've consumed most of that content, that's a lot. That's to say a lot. Yeah. So I think that Philosophy Tube is a good introduction to philosophy and does a really good job of bringing to the popular zeitgeist a lot of the ideas that are really helpful in philosophy for people to understand the world and themselves and their relationship to the world. So I think that pop philosophy is not in itself a bad thing, right? So not necessarily, because we might consider certain kinds of philosophy, like Camus, to be pop philosophy. And I think that Camus is one of the best existential authors ever in philosophy. Despite the fact that they don't have any rigorous analytic works on existentialism, doesn't matter. They have amazing stories that have helped millions, if not more, people come to understand what existentialism is and that this is something that they should care about. And I think that that's cool, right? And I think that Philosophy Tube does that kind of stuff. But going back to it's already got scrolled up too far. Going back to your initial comment, entertaining videos do seem less accurate most of the time. Philosophy Tube's videos are extremely entertaining and not always a precise picture of the philosophies that they're engaging with. And nobody should expect that either. And that's so. Going back to the other content creators who have beef with Philosophy Tube, right? I think my message to them would be, maybe you ought to adjust your expectations about what content creators are supposed to be doing, especially with regard to philosophy, because you cannot distill philosophy down to its most condensed thing and then give it to somebody as a product that they can consume, and then that consumption is going to translate into that person now having a concrete understanding of the philosophy as though they'd read that philosophy. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works, right? When any content creator or any philosopher writes anything, positive or negative, or does any critique, or does any summation, or offers any exposition, it is always an interpretation. And it's often interpretation of many other people's interpretations, right? So just I mean, that's what you do, other content creator. That's what you do with philosophy too, is you read the stuff and then interpret it and then present a content, and that content is bias and riddled with your own assumptions about what the author thought, your own ideas about the other philosophers and the background of the history and where they're coming from. That's what you are doing too. Yes, you do it more accurately, usually, but it's no less an interpretation, right? What I am doing is I am conveying my ideas about the philosophies that I have read. I can't tell you what Nietzsche means And in Nietzsche's a perfect example of this, right? If there's any person on the internet who is trying to tell you what Nietzsche means, stop listening and go read Nietzsche. That all day, every day. It's helpful to get guidance through some of the more dense philosophical ideas, but reading Nietzsche is a personal experience that you have with the book. It changes you while you read it. And there's no summation. There's no video summary that you can get. There's no video, no content creation that any content creator can make that is going to be the same as reading Nietzsche. And you should adjust your expectations, because you're a content creator who is just creating content for people on the internet to consume. Stop taking yourself so fucking seriously. Seriously. I'm not trying to start anything. Certainly not calling out any names. Because most of those content creators I consider to be more adept at understanding the philosophies that they've tackled. And I don't want to go toe-to-toe with them on some of those things. But might be copyright, but well, I guess that's true. I guess that's true. Political daddy. All right. I'm kind of winding down. Good. Thanks. Appreciate that. I had intended to talk about a lot more stuff today, but I had also intended to not spend an hour just talking before I got started to the video. Thank you, those of you who helped keep me on track and helped me remember that was on the agenda for, because I'm pretty sure it was Jane. It's almost always Jane that's helping me remember to do the things that I said I was gonna do. So thank you. But I'm tired, and I want to use the last little bit of sunlight I have to go out and work on my van. I've got some issues. I've got a power issue, which I thought was the alternator, but I bought new brushes for the alternator. I pulled the whole alternator out and went to replace the brushes and found out that the brushes that were already in the alternator look fantastic. They probably have only been in there for 4 or 5 years. I bet it was done right before I bought the vehicle. So yeah, I'm trying to get to where I can stream longer, but the last few weeks I've just been so overwhelmed with schoolwork that it's been hard. It's been hard to stream for more than 2 or 3 hours at a time. And today I'm trying to do stuff that I haven't had the chance to do for the last 2 or 3 weeks because I've been so busy with school stuff. So I'm going to go try and get caught up in some of my personal affairs, and figure out why my power system is not running efficiently as much as it should be. Thanks. I really appreciate your perseverance too, Nisa. Thank you for being here. It's great to see you. It's thank you all so much for being here. I've mentioned this before, that if it weren't for you all showing up all the time, I wouldn't be showing up either. So thank you all for being here, and for having these awesome conversations, for helping me learn some new stuff, relearn, and helping me learn new stuff about which I thought I already knew a whole bunch. So I need to start looking for a raid target. Let's get us out of here. Good. And I've got more stuff There was, like I said, there was quite a bit of stuff that I kind of wanted to talk about today that I'm shelving. But it's okay. Um, Having a whole lot of content that's a backlog is not really that bad of a thing. Hey, we got that started. Ah, this is a new one. Kakita? Thank you, Kai Matara. Hopefully I've pronounced that somewhat correctly. NPR cadence. Yeah. Yeah, thank you all for putting up with my NPR cadence. Because I bet I come off a little bit that way sometimes. But it looks like we're set to raid. Thank you. I'm probably gonna need some luck. Especially when I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know what I'm doing in this one. So I appreciate you all so much. Apolitical Daddy, it's good to see you. Matt, Kayamatara, Jane, always pleasure. Nisa, it's just I have an awesome community. Thank you all for showing up. Oh, and one guy in. They didn't stick around for very long. We'll have to catch up some other time. We'll catch you next time, one guy in. We'll see you guys. We'll see all of you later. I'm gonna stop rambling so that we can finally get out of here. And until the next time I see you, be excellent to each other.